Okay.
So Danny, I'm just going to give you a quick introduction. So the first speaker today is Daniel Lam. He's the technical lead of the Islandora Foundation, and he's going to give an overview, an introduction to Islandora Claw. So go ahead, Danny.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you to everyone at UTSC for setting this up, Kim and Marcus for emceeing, and Nat and everyone else over there for all the work that you've been doing recently to support Islandora, and in particular Islandora Claw. So thanks for having me and setting this up. This is great. Very exciting opportunity for me. So as you can see, this presentation is entitled An Introduction to Claw and Linked Data. I was going to introduce myself, not realizing that Marcus was going to do it for me, but anyway, I'm Danny. I'm the tech lead for the Islandora Foundation. You'll see me around on GitHub as Danny Lam. I live in PEI, hence the potatoes in my avatar, okay? So we're gonna start pretty much at the ground floor today. The responses that we received from the poll that Kim issued has shown the majority of folks today have little to no experience with Claw or Islandora or linked data. So I'm gonna try to take it at a pretty basic level here. And for those of you that are, more in the know, like, please bear with me, promise there's going to be at least some interesting stuff ahead for you, okay? So what is Claw, right? At its heart, it's the same as Islandora 7X. It's the combination of Drupal and Fedora, right? This is essentially what Islandora is. And we do this because the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Together, they make a better system for managing a repository. And that's an easy reduction to make, okay? Because in the end, it's not just Drupal plus Fedora equals Islandora. Like, there's a lot more going on. There's Solar, there's a triple store, there's services for derivative generation, there's all these little pieces of middleware that glue it all together. Like, there's a lot. It's a large, sweeping, like, suite, okay? And that's kind of the way it has to be when you're like an all-in-one product, kind of like we are. And we'll touch base on all of those things as we go. Okay, but for now, just think like Islandora Claw lets you manipulate things in Fedora via Drupal. Okay. So before we really jump in, I'll kind of cover the background of the project, and then we'll dive into what it does and what you can do with it, and kind of like gently introduce a little linked data along the way. Okay. So I guess it starts with like our strategic goals. Like what was the goal of this project, right? Took a big risk in doing this. We're doing something very different. I think it's very cutting edge and very unique, and so like, why would we do this? Like such a crazy, almost like reinvention of our own software, right? So like from like an ultra high level here, okay, what we were looking to achieve was that it was easy to install, okay? First and foremost, right? Like this is first on the list here, and there's a reason for that. Islandora has traditionally always been difficult to install, and it's a hurdle. Because it is so much more than just Drupal plus Fedora equals Islandora, right? Like all those little things, you got to install all those little things. You have to configure all those little things. You have to verify that all of those little things are working together when you're done doing so. And quite frankly, it's extremely difficult to do by hand. It's just a large system with a lot of moving pieces. And it's a big barrier to entry, like barrier to entry numero uno, right? And if we want people to adopt Islandora, We cannot give them something that their sysadmin spends 2 weeks on and says like, I give up. This is crazy. Why would you even consider something like this, right? Um, as we all kind of know sysadmins to be a little cranky at times, right? Not to overgeneralize. And so like if we do that, right, like we're limiting adoption. So we have to be able to make this installable. All right. Um, yes, they are awesome. I know it's a generalization. Um, but we need to do something where people can install it and it's not just this massive hurdle. It can't be like 2 weeks of lost time. Like that's insane, right? Um, next thing was that it had to be easy to scale. This is another big hurdle. The amount of data that we're collecting is growing every day. Everyone's collecting more. And if we want to be in this for the long haul, we need to be able to handle all of it. All right. And you got to be able to scale. And, an all-in-one box, it works great for a smaller institution. You certainly can install Claw that way. Many claws will be installed that way, I suppose. But if you really have a lot you need to take care of, you need to be able to scale when you want to, period. And you need to be able to have more data, handle more page hits, and handle more active users, okay? The next kind of main goal is that it has to be easy to sustain and maintain. We have a very good sized community, I guess medium sized, I don't know, I'm guessing. It's a good sized community that Islandora has, and it's growing and interest is great, okay? But at the end of the day, you have to be aware that people can only volunteer so much time. Bosses can't like loan me developers for months on end. People can't just toss away their personal lives and like hack on Islandora or Claw indefinitely, okay? And we have to respect and sort of understand the limits of how open source software works. So like at all costs, we kind of have to look at what we're doing and say like, do we really need to do this ourselves, right? Like, has someone else solved this? Can we use that, right? And shrinking the code base and having less code to maintain means that we can manage the code with less time, less resources, okay? Because it's always at a premium, right? The next goal was to provide a better experience for repository admins, okay? We want a better and more responsive site, like first and foremost. We want to look great, right? And just as importantly, we need to give you, the user, like more control over the repository through the user interface. And this is like Islandora's thing, right? Like we're turnkey and we expose so much through the user interface that if you want to use it in this kind of turnkey fashion, like you don't need a programmer and stuff like that, right? And so we want to do that, except we want to do it more, we want to do it better, right? And also similarly, we want to provide a better experience for the developers and the sysadmins that have to take care of this thing, right? And this is a tough one, okay? It falls in line with our goals of sustainability, but we go kind of beyond that, right? And so, like I said, like it's a turnkey system if you want, but if you want more, you shouldn't really have to suffer in order to make that happen, right? Like knowledge shouldn't be limited or restricted to like a chosen few, okay? If you want to do it yourself, it needs to be possible. And if you're at an institution, you should be able to train an employee without like years of onboarding, right? And if you want to do it in-house, or if you don't want to do it in-house, you should have a choice of vendors. And those vendors need to have an easier time finding and training talent as well, right? Like making it easier to develop with and for Islandora, like benefits everyone in the long run, right? Even if you're not a developer. And it fosters innovation. You make it easier to work on, more likely people are going to do cool things. And then hopefully some of those cool things are going to actually like make their way back to the foundation, right? Like we're hoping that those contributions will like flow back and help improve the overall product, right? And the last kind of strategic goal was that we wanted to like increase and promote our inter-community collaboration. Like we're doing this for a couple of reasons. One is that we use other people's software like all the time and generally don't contribute back to it. And so it's like, how can we ask people to do the same if we're not doing that ourselves? There's that aspect of it. and we use this software all the time. So kind of like, scratching someone else's back is beneficial because you never know when you might, need your back scratched. You might need a favor, right? And I know that sounds kind of like political, and it kind of is, all right, but it's important. It's a very important part of open source software. Um, and sort of the other big reason for this goal is that we're hoping to help like expose Islandora to potentially like other larger communities, right? We want to expand adoption. We want more people using it because in the end, that means that more things are going to flow back to us, and then it's just going to be better in general, right? Um, and so those are some lofty goals, right? But I'm actually, pretty happy to report that we've kind of nailed it. We've done very well on all of these fronts, okay? So kind of very quickly in turn, um, I can go over them. Installation, number one problem, right? Very proud of this. The Islandora community, not me, I didn't program this, all right? Not a vendor, okay? Like the community has developed a completely free installer for Claw. And you can use that to get a development environment using Vagrant, okay? Or you can have a production ready machine with it. It's not just for dev environments, right? Like you can put it on a VM in the cloud, you can put on something in-house. UTSC has been instrumental in making that happen, by the way. And we're not gonna like, sort of like tease you with a VM, like we make a release, we cut a VM, and it's like, here you go, here's all the cool stuff you can do. But then if you want to do this, like, welcome to the installation nightmare, right? And so we don't want to do that to people. So the installer, it's very flexible, it's very customizable, and that's because it's built on top of Ansible. Ansible it's a fantastic DevOps tool. Your sysadmins will thank you. It's another product. It's up there with like a Puppet or Chef. Conceptually it's a little bit different, okay, but it's in that league of things. It's in Python and YAML. It's pretty easy to get started. And we're taking advantage of that tool because then it gives us the flexibility and the modularity that we're really looking for, right? So if you want to do a development VM, you can just like pull down the code, hit Vagrant up, bang, Vagrant up, enter, and it'll go, right? But if you want to do it on like an actual like production environment, there's some extra configuration you have to go through, okay? But we've made it about as reasonably straightforward as you can to install something that is so complicated with so many moving parts, right? And you can break it apart. We've architectured it in such a way that you can install bits and pieces on different machines, so you're not trapped to an all-in-one kind of setup at the end of the day, all right? And this has been the focus of the last few community sprints. It's been a huge success. I think it's something that really sets us apart from other technologies. Totally free. Supports Ubuntu 16.04. We're very close to supporting CentOS 7, so we're hitting like the two major Linux OSs. We're targeting LTSs, like long-term service releases. It's a fantastic thing, and it's something that it's happened because it just shows you how powerful like common ground and common need is. There was a common need from everyone in the community to be able to install this software, and so it happened. The community took over, and they've been pushing forward, like particularly on the CentOS end of things, without a sprint. It's taken a life of its own. So it's really fantastic that we've been able to provide this for people. The next big goal was scaling, right? So which historically has always been a problem. And the problem with scaling is that it demands a lot more to do. Like you can make something installable by writing an installer and providing it, and not to trivialize that because that's a lot of work. But that's like, okay, I know what I can do. I can make a plan and I can go and I can do it, right? But like, so installable, sure, we can do that. Scalable, that's like a back to the drawing board kind of scenario, right? Like if it's not set up with that in mind, like you can try as hard as you like, but you're not gonna get there unless it's like really specifically designed to do this. All right, which is what we did, and yeah, it's taken a while, right? But it's been worth it. And like to scale the software, you really got to break it down into teeny tiny little pieces and be able to ramp those up independently of one another, kind of based on your needs, your demands, right? That software has to be highly decoupled. You hear me say that a lot. And it's been like a privilege to work on this project because every step of the way, when we run into something that seems like a tangled mess, we have stopped and we have said, wait a minute, what's going on here? You know, let's suss this out. Let's decouple these pieces so that they don't need to unnecessarily know about each other. And then that gives us options. You can swap out parts, right? You can ramp up parts and install more to do more, to process more faster and stuff like that. And there's all sorts of goodies that we're getting, and the rest of the strategic goals even were really possible to be met because we took the time to decouple the software so that we could scale it, okay? And by the way, I have nice Matryoshka dolls here. I think that's how you say it. And by the way, I'll just show you like every image I've got here. It's free, and I've got attributions to it. So we're all legit. As much as I love animated GIFs, staying above board here. So yeah, so I guess that kind of leads here to the fundamental difference. I'm going to take a quick aside here before I get to the next strategic goal. The fundamental difference between Claw and its competitors, and I say that in quotes. We are friendly with the other products in the space, but what makes us stand apart from the crowd? Like the main distinction between Claw and other Fedora-based systems is the role that Fedora plays. So in Claw, Fedora is the repository, but it's not the database driving the web app that is administering the repository. And that's a key distinction, all right? And what that means is that instead of letting Fedora get in the middle of every single page request, we still talk to Fedora as we're doing business, but we don't let it get in the way. We're not trying to wrap a Fedora with a Drupal, like mimicking all of its features. We're letting them sit side by side and work together to each do what they do best. This is very important because now that Fedora is an LDP server, which I'll touch on later, it can be used very differently. Instead of like only being accessed through Drupal, you can like expose your Fedora within your organization to like other departments and stuff like that, or you can even take it outside your firewall and be like firmly of the web, okay? But no matter how you choose to use your Fedora, right? When someone hits your Drupal site, they're not requesting things directly from your institution's repository, right? Like they're getting copies that are scaled down and put on a system so that they can be delivered more efficiently than from your repository, right? You're not going to choke your Fedora constantly requesting all of these things, all right? Because your stuff's supposed to go in your repository and it's supposed to sit in your repository. That's kind of the approach we took, right? And to the point where even like when you're editing information in your repository, you're really editing like a working copy that is within Drupal, and then like eventually the changes make their way out to your Fedora, okay? The other half of scaling here that I'm just going to go ahead and talk about too, it is, well, okay. So that's one scalability issue, is your Fedora and how you use your Fedora. But the other scalability issues, there are many more other than just Fedora, right? Like what happens if everything's on one box and you're processing thousands and thousands of images and you're running OCR on them, right? Like you're trying to extract some text, you're just hammering that box, like you're crushing it, you're killing it. And you need to be running Tesseract or Abby or whatever you're using somewhere else, right? Like not on the public facing like server that's handling the web traffic, right? Like you don't want to be doing that there. So hence microservices, all right? That's sort of, you hear this, it's a buzzword, it gets dropped a lot. Okay, it's really not that complicated, all right? You hear like service-oriented architecture and like there's even more buzzwords, right? But it all boils down to like anything that could potentially take a long time or a bunch of resources gets wrapped up as a tiny web application, all right? And why? And it's because web servers are easy to scale. I mean, easy in quotes, it's still work, but there are known techniques for scaling web servers, all right? And everyone knows HTTP, like everyone, right? And there's already some out there, right? Like the Fits web service, we use that. You post it, you upload a file to it, and you get your Fits, right? It's that simple. Need more Fits action? Then you can spin up more Fits servers. You can put them behind a load balancer, cluster, and whatever. Like choose your technique. Okay, that's far beyond the realm of this discussion, but there are things you can do. You can have more. All right. If you need more and you have the resources, you can get more and you can get things done faster. And if you don't need them and you don't want them, you don't have to run them, right? Like repositories often need like a glut of resources during large batch processes, but then once it's all in, like it's just kind of sitting there. So you can actually deallocate resources. Like you don't have to have everything running all the time, right? So you can run the overall system with less if you're willing to pare things down, all right? And we make many microservices ourselves, right? Like not all of them have been provided, like the Fifth service. We call the collection of them Crayfish. It's got this cute logo. All right, it's on GitHub. There's a link there. And this overlaps with one of the other strategic goals, which is the inter-community collaboration, because our microservices are written in such a way that they're compatible with API X, which means that they can be used with every Fedora. Any Fedora 4, 5, whatever you want to call it, any Fedora server that's LDP can use most of these microservices that we're providing to do things. So it's not just us, we're doing it in such a way that it benefits other people too, which is nice. All right, so sorry, little aside there, back to the goals. So sustainability and maintenance, right? This is another pretty big deal, right? Like we got 2 employees, right? The foundation has 2 employees. It's me and Melissa, that's it, right? And I work on Claw a lot, all right? Like a ton, it's pretty much my life. But one person is not enough to like maintain and sustain this code base. Like it's too big, it's too much, right? And 7X is still there, which has a very large amount of technical debt. So like if this is gonna work, it's gotta be lean. It's gotta be small. It's gotta have tests, right? And we've like very purposefully just like shed huge amounts of code to achieve this. I mean, like just walk through with a flamethrower and torched it. Like we have to, right? Now we definitely don't have all the same features and functionality as 7X. Like we're a long ways away from that, okay? But for the features that we do, kind of like pound for pound, apples to apples, right? Like we do it with a fraction of the code. Every step of the way, we're evaluating what's out there, and if there's something else we can use, we use it, right? And so only as a last resort do we write something ourselves. And if we do, we provide tests. Even the install code has tests, right? Like our installer has tests, all right? And that's how serious we are about it. You never know what you're gonna break when you do something. And so having those tests are like the first line of defense. It can be automated, it can be run through, continuous integration, and it can help us as, what I would characterize as an understaffed crew that's maintaining this code, okay? User experience. All right, so user experience, generally speaking, with Claw, that was supposed to go in all at once. I had a cool series of clicks planned. Oh well. User experience, generally speaking, is Drupal's. And although Drupal is not without its user experience critics, right? Like it is a very solid improvement. You can control how an object is displayed through the user interface. You control the form for how you upload and edit an object through the user interface. You can model content and control your metadata through the user interface. It's very customizable now that everything is Drupal-y. And we've unlocked, Drupal's contributed modules. Modules on Drupal.org will actually work with your content now. So you have viewers, slideshows, themes, JavaScript, like all this stuff is going to actually work for you now. You're not limited to only the modules that are provided by the Islandora community. And this is how we manage to keep the code base so small. We actively leverage contributed modules and encourage you to do the same, okay? We've unlocked views, which let you query for resources and format the results all through the user interface, right? You can run SQL queries through user interface. Not necessarily the most straightforward at times, but you know what? The information's out there, there's tutorials, You can obviously read documentation on Drupal.org, but then, there's Drupalize.me, and Lullabot offered courses, and there's all kinds of information out there that's available for you to learn how to do these things, like views, okay? We also use inline forms, so you can edit multiple things at once. And finally, kind of I just want to make a nod to the context module, which is a relatively new addition to Claw, but it lets you tailor the functionality of your site based on the criteria that you define. So you want different collections to have different themes, no problem. You need different users to see different forms for the same object, no problem. We even use context in a way of exposing Drupal hooks and alters through the user interface. So a lot of things that in 7x would have required you to have a programmer, now we can provide, okay, as these things called plugins, and they will basically let you do all of this advanced customizable functionality through a user interface, all right? It gives you so much fine-grained control. You can even use it to limit what gets published to Fedora or indexed in your Drupal store. Even the most core features of the software can be controlled through it. It's incredibly powerful. All right. So the developer sysadmin experience, this one I'll go over pretty quickly because I've kind of touched on most of it before. Doing all that decoupling to scale is what kind of unlocked everything. So I've kind of already talked about all this, but I'll just go through pretty quickly here. Okay. The user experience, when you're in Drupal, it's very Drupal-y. It's object-oriented. We use dependency injection extensively. We make everything plugins, which is just a Drupal standardized way of making things swappable. I don't want to get too far into it here. And of course, contrib modules. These huge, did I say contrib modules already? I mean, this is a huge deal for us to be able to use this. It's also definitely better for themers and front-end developers. Traditionally, that's been a very difficult part of working with Drupal. Islandora 7x, it's another layer on top of that. And at least we've kind of just pared it back down to what Drupal does, right? You can use views, like I mentioned before. You can do a ton of stuff with that. And Twig templating is definitely a step up from the Drupal 7 theming experience. We do our microservices, Crayfish in Silex, which is a very small framework built out of Symfony components. It's not exactly the same as Drupal, but if you know enough, you can totally crank out a small Silex app very quickly. It's very small, simple, and quite frankly, it's fun. Writing the microservices is fun. That's one of the funnest parts. And then for the stuff that has to run forever, for the infinite loops out there in the code, so to speak, okay, we use Apache Camel, which at first seems really arcane, all right, because it's Java. And on top of that, it's got its own domain-specific language, DSL, so it kind of looks unlike any Java you've ever seen, all right? But it has an insanely active community, impressively active community. It blows us out of the water. Can't even, Hydra plus Avera plus whatever, you name it, DSpace, everything. You take all of library land, and it's still probably smaller than the Apache Camel community. It's huge. You sign up for their mailing list, and it's you're turning on the fire hose. You better have a filter set up for that. All right. And then finally, for the sysadmins, right, we're using Ansible. So you can install it with Ansible, right? But if you have Ansible, you can also maintain your servers. So it's super nice because with Ansible, you can push all of your commands to all of your servers. If you've got a 5-server setup where you've got it broken apart and there's Drupal on one box and MySQL on another box and Fedora on another box and Solar on another box and a Triple Store on another box, and you need to update all 5 boxes at some basic core OS level, right? You can use Ansible to push the command to update your 5 boxes all at the same time, right? It's super cool. And finally, our last, oh, thanks, Rachel. Sorry, I didn't see that. And so the last strategic goal we had was collaboration, right? We want to work more with other communities. It's generally good for everyone involved, right? For both parties to be involved and engaged. I've already mentioned that our microservices are available for Fedora users via APIX. But another important thing to consider is our engagement level with the Drupal community. We're on the cutting edge for a lot of stuff that I am positive is useful to the greater Drupal community. We're doing linked data if you want to. All right, you don't have to. It's not a requirement, but if you want to, we're doing it. We're doing linked data with Drupal, right? To an extent, I will qualify all of that later. All right. And we're also managing, and I'm going to use some Drupal speak here, we're managing media, all right, which is a Drupal terminology. Basically, media means like a file, right, like a binary file, all right? I'm glossing over some things here, but this is an introduction, right? So not to get too into the weeds, but we are managing large amounts of media, and we'll be batch processing them and doing things like generating derivatives, right? And this is something that's not there for the Drupal community, right? Like we could actually provide something that is useful to them, right? And it can open up the doors to a whole other set of users that could, you know, I'm hesitant to say this, but like quote unquote, take it mainstream. All right. I know there's some connotations to that. It's not going to make it lame. It's not going to make it corporate or whatever, right? And there's still going to be plenty of library specific stuff here. I'm not saying we're going to leave that space, okay? But ultimately, we're better off being part of the Drupal community than not, right? And it's better for us to engage and help fix things that we find with Drupal and contribute that back. It's better to do that than to hang out on the sidelines and kind of just, I don't know, complain. You know, like we kind of do that a lot. It's easy to complain about Drupal. Familiarity breeds contempt, right? So anyway, those were our goals. We've actually done very well on that. The Claw project has come a long way since it first started. All right. So I gave some history and kind of what we were trying to achieve. All right. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about what it can do. I'm not going to do a full-blown demo here or step you through screenshot after screenshot after screenshot here, but I'm going to try to at least show you some of the things that we can do with Claw now. Okay. And so something that's kind of important to understand before I start here, right, is that since our Fedora and our Drupal are sitting like side by side, and we're not trying to bring all of the features of one into the other, we can identify where those two things have overlaps in functionality and like use that to our advantage. So we can isolate where we have to write custom code by picking the pieces of each that are the closest to each other before gluing them together, right? That's the intersection of the Venn diagram, right? Like that's the purple piece, and that's essentially what Islandora is. At least that's what the Islandora code is, right? And that's a big distinction, okay? Because users are not limited to only the features that are in the middle. We're not stuck in the purple part here, right? Like you actually have the union of all of this. You can use all of Drupal and you can use all of Fedora if you want. And then the parts where they overlap, we've kind of bolted together, okay? And so it just gives you a lot of choice, right? And I would say we haven't fully filled in the purple part yet. Like I'll get to that. There's still some things hanging around that we'll get to once like the API specification finalizes, okay, like versions, right? Drupal does versions, Fedora does versions. We should be able to make those things line up. But like the way the mode shape implementation works right now, it's not compliant with the specification. It's just different. And so we're just going to wait until everything's compliant with the Memento spec. And then we'll go ahead and we'll tie on to that, right? So there's still some plates in the air, I guess is what I'm trying to say, right? I mean, obviously, it's not finished, right? I mean, is 7x finished? No. It just kind of goes forever. So when we started, we thought it'd be a good idea to try to limit that scope of what we're trying to do, try to isolate the smallest amount of that purple part of the Venn diagram, right? Because 7x has a huge, ridiculous number of features, and there's no way we can bring them all over at once. Like it's crazy talk. So we created a document describing like what we call the minimum viable product, that's MVP. And it's like, what's the least we can do to make this thing fully formed, all right? So here's a link to it. You can check it out. It's part of our documentation, so you can see it at any point in time, okay? But so here's the features we highlighted. And this is copied like word for word from the doc, okay? So content modeled as Drupal, in Drupal as entities using PCDM. REST API for Drupal entities, support for collections, images, books, pages, the ability to control metadata mappings, to provide an RDF-based default descriptive metadata profile, import and export JSON LD, which is a form of RDF. We'll talk about that in a bit. Automatically back up your Drupal content in Fedora. I mean, that's the main feature. That's what Islandora is like at its core is supposed to do. The ability to restore or bootstrap a Drupal site from properly structured Fedora 4. Okay, that was shooting for the moon a little bit, but it's still on the table. I'll get to that in a second. That's an impressive feature, but that's a big deal. The ability to index and search resources with Solr, I think that's obviously we can all agree we want our stuff to be discoverable. The ability to restrict access to collections and or individual resources across representations, right? Like if you shouldn't be able to, like, if you're blocked out of it in Fedora, you shouldn't be able to see it in Drupal or vice versa, right? And you don't want people searching for things that, you don't want search hits coming back of stuff that they're not supposed to see, right? And this is like straight from 7x functionality. Asynchronous derivative generation, that's part of the scalability, and a vagrant environment for development purposes, right? That's what when we were like young and naive and first starting this is what we identified, right? And so here's what we managed to get done, okay? Which is quite a bit. So you can see I've kind of crossed out everything. And certainly not everything played out the way we thought it would when we first started, because sometimes you just don't know until you get in there, right? But yeah, content modeled in Drupal as entities, check, we did that. It's everything you make in Claw. It's just like you're working in Drupal. So if you want to learn Claw, then learning Drupal will get you like a very long way, okay? And then we sort of say that about 7x2, but not that we're fibbing, okay, but like we really mean it now, like when we're talking Claw. Like when you're working here, you're working with Drupal, all right? REST API exposed for Drupal entities. Well, this is something we thought was going to be all magical and very like RDF based and everything, and it turns out that's trickier than you think. You can see here that I say that we export JSON LD. That's true. We don't import it yet. There's just a lot more to that. So what we're using is really what Drupal provides for REST API, and we're just working with that. So right now, like the stuff in the background, it's all just using JSON formats that Drupal provides. All right, we have a few of our own endpoints that we wrote, but very little, very little. Okay, to get the REST API. We support collection images. We do not have books and pages. Okay, and even though they're still left, I think it's like we've already kind of started to identify Nat at UTSC has kind of pinpointed this a little bit, that we're making some assumptions between like what is a book and what is a scanned collection of pages, because they're not necessarily the same thing. Like you could have a book that's, a PDF. You could have a book that's in EPUB format, right? Like it's not, books are not just scanned sets of pages, okay? So even though we don't have that, we'll totally support scanned sets of pages, by the way. But even though we don't have that, you could see some of that happening sooner rather than later, because there's many different ways to have a book, all right? And some of those are easier to support than others out of the box, all right? You can control metadata mappings, although it is a bit awkward. There's definitely room for improvement there, okay? That's a very kind of low-level thing. You gotta export and import configuration manually to make that happen, but you can, okay? So here's, as I'm going through the list, here's the first one we really haven't done all of the way. Provide an RDF-based default descriptive metadata profile in Drupal. And I have labeled that as ongoing, okay? Yeah, ongoing. That is a slippery wheel, all right? But again, some more UTSC innovations here. We're working through a way to at least make the managing of the metadata profiles be easier, less administrivia, because these RDF formats, they can get very complex, like lots of things that reference other things that reference other things, right? Like the Matryoshka dolls almost. And so what we're doing is we're probably going to just push through and do something really simple like DC terms, and then see how that plays out so that we can figure out how we can do these other more complicated things that have merit to them, right? Like EDM or bib frame, without just like jumping, head first into that pool, right? So that's where we're going with that. Of course, you can back up your content in Fedora 4. The ability to restore bootstrap the site, that's what I was saying. We were shooting for the moon there. We can do it. I've very purposely made sure that we still have the capability or capacity to do it, but we're not doing it right now just because it's not being prioritized over the other features. The metadata profile, more important. The derivative generation, more important. It's just, you have to prioritize things. And it will take a level of sort of invasiveness in your metadata that we'll have to do. Basically, it just means we'll have to stick some like really Drupal specific stuff in there in order to make that work, okay? For what it's worth. Maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing. That's for folks to decide. So the other things, I'll rattle through these real quickly. Solar, you can search. We get that third-party Drupal module out of the box. Access restriction, sure, we have Drupal access restrictions, and so it can lock down what you can see in Solar, and then based on the way we play with things in Fedora, you're not really capable of messing things up. We kind of have to play some games here because we can't make Drupal permissions line up with how Fedora does permissions, but we can have like a convention that makes things work. So that's what we're doing. We have the asynchronous derivative generation that's very close. I've got some code here that I keep pushing out bits and pieces of it, but it's happening very soon. And then we have the Vagrant environment, and we went like above and beyond there, right? Like we have a full-blown Ansible installer now. So we didn't hit some things, or haven't hit them yet. Let me put it that way. And we hit some extra things. But nonetheless, like what came out, it's small, okay, but it's strong. Like surprisingly, it just does all the same stuff, but with like a fraction of the code. That's why I have an ant here. Right? It's the best kind of metaphor I could find. And then there was all these things that popped out outside of the MVP that we didn't even plan on, that just happened because of the way we did things. One of them is that there's kind of a bookmark-esque functionality that you get kind of out of the box, where all the operations that we do, we wrap up in these plugins called actions. And because of that, you can actually expose them on your Drupal UI, and like out of the core, if you make one, just out of the core like administrative page for your content, you'll get a drop-down box. You can put check marks on the things you want, and then you can apply these operations. So you can see like even these core operations I've got, like index in Fedora, index in Triple Store, right? You can do these kind of like bulk operations very easily. You can use views, you can query for something, control all that through the UI, get your hits, and then select the ones you want with checkboxes and say, do this stuff, right? Which is great. Fantastic. And this is something that happened because Diego Pino and Kim Pham, I asked to investigate something totally unrelated, something that we're not even using anymore, like rules and views bulk operations and some other third-party modules, and it didn't work, right? But Diego kind of mentioned this technique, well, why don't we just wrap everything in actions? And so sure enough, when I was doing a refactor, I just went ahead and did it. And yeah, like what we got, like it's great. And that's basically just, we got it because we're doing something the Drupal way, right? Not much extra effort there. We also have inline forms. So it might be hard to see here, but you're actually editing the object and its data streams, if you want to use 7x speak, all at the same time, all in one form. So there's no multi-step forms. It's just one big form, right, that you can expand and collapse as you want. And it's just awesome. We're not burying stuff in manage tabs. It's all kind of, you click edit and you get the whole thing, right? And then another thing that we got that was kind of hidden, and I'm sorry, I'm rushing here. I'm trying to keep an eye on the time. Was triple IF. So it was like this hidden requirement kind of buried in the MVP. We didn't know it was going to be there, or at least we weren't aware of it when we were saying it. But then, yeah, if you want to support images, you got to support large images. You got to support TIFFs, JP2s. You got to have something to do that. So we actually have, with the installation, you get a triple IF server, you get Cantaloupe. We get OpenSeaDragon. Believe it or not, that's what these squares are. That's their logo. They wasted a perfectly good, what an Islandora thing to say. They've wasted a perfectly good opportunity to put doe eyes on a cute ocean animal, and they didn't do it. So I love your software, but shame on you. Okay, you could have a cute sea dragon with googly eyes right now. Okay, so that is like a very rough overview of what you can do, right? Like you can ingest things through forms, you can edit things through forms, you can control the structure of things and your metadata. I mean, that's really what Drupal is, right? Like a content management system. Well, we're using it as like a content modeling system, right? Like we can say that. There's a REST API. You can talk to it from another machine. You can use web requests to do stuff, all of the stuff actually, right? You know, all of that, right? But sort of one of the big features that I guess was identified as what's everyone here is curious about, and obviously it is so interesting because it's what's so different about Fedora 4, right? Or 5, as it will soon be. I like to just say Fedora. But linked data, right? Like I've talked about some of the basics, but I haven't really mentioned how linked data fits into all of this, right? So I'm going to go ahead and go through that now. All right. And I am going to do my best to make this as gentle as possible. All right. Linked data is awesome. I mean, it's the future. There's no doubt about that. All right. It's a huge paradigm shift. But sometimes it can be a little academic, a little bit more academic than it should, or maybe a little bit too much for its own good, maybe. Okay. But it's a pretty intimidating subject, and lots of times like the conversation starts and then I can see people just turtle, like they'll just go into their shell and they'll just be like, oh my god, I don't know what's going on, and I'm too scared to talk, right? And so hopefully at the end of this, maybe you can have a little bit more knowledge under your belt so you won't be so scared to talk when these conversations come up. Okay, so what does Wikipedia say? All right, here we go. I'm just going to read it. Linked data is a method of publishing structured data so that it can be interlinked and become more useful through semantic queries. It builds upon standard web technologies such as HTTP, RDF, and URIs, but rather than using them to serve web pages for human readers, it extends them to share information in a way that can be read automatically by computers. All right. Ugh. Wow. All right. That's a mouthful. Lots of initialisms, whatever you want to call them, shortenings of words there that you might not be picking up on. Okay, so I'll break that down for you in a second here. But maybe first, that's the academic definition of it. But where did it come from, right? Came from this guy right here, Tim Berners-Lee, Sir Tim Berners-Lee. He's knighted. That's how important this guy is. TBL, as the cool kids call him. Okay. This guy, he has done so much for us. Most of you probably already know him, okay? But if you don't, this is the guy that's hey, what happened? Okay, I'm back. I'm sorry. Can you see me? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Sorry about that, folks. Country internets. All right, share the screen. It would not be a live demo or a presentation without something going wrong. All right, here we go. TVL shut me down. That's right. He didn't like my sass mouth. All right. So here's what he said. He wrote a note. Sum it up. This is what he's saying. Bullet point form, like TLDR format. Okay. use URIs to name things. You make those URIs HTTP web-based so you can look them up. You provide useful information about the stuff that you're looking up, okay, using RDF, right? And when you do that and you reference other things, you reference them through their web URI, okay? It means that, so you can just kind of crawl out on the web and find everything. That's real. That's it. That's linked data. You know, you can make it in-house and it's just linked data. You can make it all public, then it's linked open data. Okay, but it's linked data, plain and simple. So it seems really straightforward. Okay, but actually it gets a little tricky. Okay. We can talk about some of those terms here just in case. I don't want to leave anyone behind. Okay. So if you know this, it's cool. Just gonna run through them real fast. All right. Considering I have 7 minutes left here. So URI. It's a uniform resource identifier. It's an ID, basically. Long story short, it's an ID. You all probably know that, all right? HTTP URI, that's a web link. It's an ID you can go visit. You can hit it up in a browser, all right? RDF, that is the resource description framework, okay? And it's a way of describing things in triples, right? We've been using it all along. In 7x, we use RDF, right? RailsX is RDF. It comes in a lot of formats, right? You got an XML version, you got a JSON version. That's what we use, okay? And there's other stuff, right? You can just says like lists of triples or turtle format is like a more human readable way of doing the triples, okay? But long story short, you summarize everything in a subject, predicate, object format. You know, Danny Lamb has computer, Linux laptop, right? Like it's just 1, 2, 3, like that. You got a subject, you got a verb, and you got an object of that verb. That's how it works. And then he also mentioned Sparkle. Okay, yeah. Sparkle, which is like a query language for RDF. It's not SQL. It's not all that onerous to learn, but it's very dry. The material online is pretty dry. It's hard to find a good tutorial on Sparkle, but you know we're already using it in 7x. We're using it here too. It's a thing, and you need to learn it. And then here's the big one. Semantics. Okay. They mentioned that semantic content on the web, right? And I think this is where people really get turned off sometimes. I mean, or turned on. Some people really like it, right? But when you describe things using RDF, if you like make up a new word, so to speak, like a new predicate, you have to define it, and you have to define what it means. And so we do that with an ontology. Okay, you publish an ontology. It's like, hey, here's this, and here's what I mean when I say this. Right? That's what an ontology does. All right, and you write them in RDF too. So it's like RDF all the way down. All right. And there's a lot of them. You got like you're using them already, and you don't realize it probably. DC terms, DC, bitframe, EDM, OWL, schema.org. Okay, there's tons of them here. All right, but the thing is that when you define the semantics, you're trying to say what things
I saw it on the calendar.
And maybe not everyone agrees on what things mean. And so sometimes you can get these very philosophical debates about what something is supposed to mean and why it is written this way and how it should be interpreted. And sometimes people don't see eye to eye, right? So yeah, sometimes that's where some like academic kind of scuffles can break out is over that. And I promise you, it's not as bad as it sounds. And it's people with opinions, you know? That's really what it is. And you shouldn't feel afraid to take part in conversations about it. All right. Let me move on. And yeah, if you can whoever's not muted, mute, please. Okay. So I got 3 minutes left. Maybe you'll give me a little overage here. I hope, guys. So why do all this, right? Like, why go through the hassle of doing all of this? Sounds like a lot of work, right?
Wow.
Um, and so the purpose of linked data is it's not to expose all of this stuff to humans. Like we have HTML for that. You use RDF and you do it for machines. And so linked data is an attempt to standardize how we expose RDF to machines so that they can do more intelligent things, or that so that they can act more uniformly. Okay. And you'll hear people pitch these, like spin these yarns about this amazing future where artificial intelligence is going to be like scouring the web and it's going to know all this stuff and be able to look up all this stuff because of linked data, like web 3.0, sometimes you hear it touted. And it's possible. I mean, it's not just possible, like it's probable. Okay. It probably is happening to some extent already, right? But like right now, in the here and now, in the present day, okay, like there is a legitimate benefit to it, right? And that's the software that you write. Like, your client software, okay, is going to take advantage of linked data if you set up your repository a certain way. All right. It's great. And turns out there's a specific standard for doing all this, right? It's called LDP. And guess what's an LDP server? It's Fedora. All right. So by using Claw to set up model your content, you can then ingest it and create it, and it will flow out to a linked data server, an LDP server, and then you can write intelligent software that can make decisions based on this. And if you're in theory, your software can like pull down an ontology and read it and kind of like know what to do with things. Okay. That is the long and short of it. That's why you would want to use linked data. Okay. And that's what Fedora brings to the table here, right? So it's useful within an organization, but it's also useful outside of an organization if you want to make everything like free and public and open, right? Then someone could go along and find some link between two seemingly unrelated things and like draw conclusions about it, and like bam, there you go. Like we found out something new, right? Like knowledge has expanded because everyone's put all that information out there. Okay. And okay, and so this leads to like, what does Claw do with linked data? And Claw itself doesn't do anything with linked data. Claw helps you publish your linked data. It helps you manage your linked data. Okay, you can make it, you can edit it, you can delete it. Okay. Other than that, what you're doing with your linked data is up to you. Okay, and the reason is that, again, this is very new. This is very cutting edge. Okay, and I can't necessarily make Claw a super semantic application, because then that means that it makes all of these kind of assumptions about things and data and how it's presented and stuff like that. And it might work for one institution, but it's not really going to be guaranteed to work for every institution or everyone that wants to use Claw. Okay. But you can do what you want with your linked data. And all of these things that people want to do with linked data, I mean, this is cutting edge stuff. Like, you're going to write papers about this stuff, right? Like, this is going to be like theses and stuff like that. This isn't how Claw works out of the box, but it's something that Claw will enable you to do. All right. And that's what we're hoping to do with linked data and with Claw. So we're hoping to give people the tools that they need to be able to build the semantic web application that they want to. All right. And we do that by trying to make as few assumptions as possible. So we certainly interact with the server via LDP. There's a standard there. LDP doesn't dictate how you model your content, just how you access it, right? So we can access the data this way through LDP, and you can use Drupal to model your content, to set it up, to structure it the way that you want, and then it will flow into your LDP. And then you can start doing smarter things with it. Straight up. And the first kind of obvious thing that you can do with linked data is, well, if everyone's linking data and it's all over the place, that means I can shed some data. right? That means I can get rid of some data. That means I don't have to hold on to all this stuff. Somebody else has all this stuff and it's made public somewhere, so I can be able to point to it from somewhere else, right? Like that's the first kind of obvious thing that you can do, right? Um, and with that comes, unfortunately, it means you got to go through your metadata. It means you got to prune, and it means you got to deal with stuff. It introduces some complications that you got to handle, right? Like if everything you do is based on pointing to some other server through some other organization, what happens when that server goes down, right? Do you have a contingency plan for that? Do you have backup, right? And there's stuff like that that'll let you, you can go download and cache things and everything else, right? But like these are the types of like projects that I'm kind of talking about. Like these are the hurdles you're going to have to overcome when you're doing leak data because it's so cutting edge and it's so new. And so it's let me see, I'm rambling. I've caught myself rambling. That was actually the name of my last slide was RDF rambling. I didn't put it in, and I should have. I'm sorry. But yeah, so I guess the point I'm trying to hammer home here is that Claw is the tool that you can use to do awesome link data stuff. And it might not do it out of the box for you, okay, because I don't know exactly what you're trying to do. But it can be the tool that can let you achieve your goals, right? That's what we're trying to do. And you know what? You don't want linked data? You don't have to do it. You can stick your Fedora behind the firewall. No one else can access it. You're just storing your stuff as RDF in your preservation layer instead. Like that's it, right? So it's not even a requirement, but it's there if you want it. Yeah. Oh, that's it. I did put it in there. Rambling RDF. That's what tends to happen once I get going about this stuff. Sorry, folks. Yeah. So I guess that's it. I'll stop. I'm past my hour already. All right. So I'm sorry to take up time. But I'll go ahead and I'll leave it there. So hopefully that was an easy introduction to this for folks. Hopefully you can see what we're trying to do with Claw and where it can go and how it's going to be in general a better experience. We're trying to upgrade Islandora, make it better, and be able to do new and different things with the tools that we have.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Do you mind meeting now, just so that we don't get the
awesome echo?
The awesome echo, yes.
Yeah, let me see how to do it with this Zoom client. I'll figure it out here. Let me stop sharing my screen.
So thank you. There, okay, there I am. Okay, hi everyone. So thank you very much, Danny, for that. We're just going to transition over to an update from the Islandora Metadata Interest Group. Rosemary LeFaive from University of Prince Edward Island and Mike Bolam from the University of Pittsburgh. So those will take over in a moment. And I just want to remind you, online, if you are not speaking, if you don't mind, just that would be great, just to make the connection as clear as possible. And also another remark, a question period, 2:30 p.m. to about 3 p.m. So if you have questions for the speakers, for the team here at UTSC, please write them down and we can review those at that time. So at this time, I'd like to welcome Rosemary and Mike to start. Thanks so much.
Can everybody hear me okay? Did you guys, am I coming through? Yes, okay, great. So my name's Mike Bolam. I'm at the University of Pittsburgh. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the metadata group and some of our current tasks and goals. And then I'm going to pass that it over to Rosie, who's going to talk about what we've been working on. So we'll try to keep this in our 15 minutes or less. So the metadata IG was created to investigate and provide metadata solutions, help improve metadata creation, maintenance, and enhancement in Islandora. The we kicked off in 2014. Like a lot of these IGs, it was an attempt to find other users with similar interests, kind of the user groups gathering together within the community. We were discussing investigating metadata tools, features to enhance metadata creation and maintenance, and investigating linked open data. Through much of the first 3 years, we met about monthly. Often these were presentations or reports from users describing tools or implementations related to metadata. And then sometime towards the end of that, we began tracking and discussing what the Hydra Samvera community were doing in relation to their migration to Fedora 4, see what kind of work that they've done that we can reuse or build off of. And then at some point in the last year, we were asked to kind of assist with preparing Islandora Claw for the migration, the metadata aspects of that. So currently, the IG is working on that. We've moved to having meeting every other week, so twice a month. Our big thing is trying to deal with what's known as the mods apocalypse. Let's see if I can turn up the mic volume. I don't know that I have controls to do that on within here. Let's see. So I'm getting some people can hear pretty good and other people can't. I'm just going to try to hold the mic a little bit closer to my mouth and see if that helps out a little bit. So we're dealing with sometimes called the mods apocalypse, or what is probably the better term, our RDF Renaissance, which looks better written out than it does spoken. So mods is not inherently RDF. So we're trying to deal with all of this mods metadata we've all been creating. It's been the baseline for much of what we've been doing from the metadata side, the descriptive metadata side in Islandora. So we believe mods is doable, or that same level of description is doable, but we need to put in the work of figuring out how we can model it and represent it in RDF. So this group has been spending a lot of our time on that exercise. We want to eventually design a metadata model for migration from mods to RDF. So when people are making this transition from 7 to Claw, there is some tools or a toolkit or something similar that can be used to transition their data. Design forms, both simple and complex forms that will allow different types of users to be able to have be able to support different types of needs depending on collections, users' expertise, any number of factors. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rosie, and Rosie's going to talk a little bit more about what specifically we've been working on recently.
All right, thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Cool. Yeah, so we started off just about the same time as the Samvera metadata interest group was wrapping up their translation of mods to RDF. So we kind of started with that as something in mind as we might be working towards, but we weren't sure that that would meet the needs of the community. So we wanted to kind of build from the ground up and make sure that the metadata interest group and the Islandora community really understood the power of RDF, the different options and directions that we could go with it in terms of specificity and granularity and what kinds of ontologies we may want to choose. So Samvera, which, as you might know, is a community that is made up largely of people with a lot of development capacity. So each institution probably has like 1 or 2 full-time developers on staff and people who can work with that individual installation to make sure that it meets their needs. We know that Islandora has a lot more out-of-the-box installations, and we wanted to find something that we could kind of use as a default, like in the MVP that Danny mentioned, our default metadata profile. So to start with, we investigated some very simple but RDF-friendly vocabularies, so Dublin core. Both the original 15-element strict set, the elements, and DC terms, the newer expansion of Dublin core to allow for a little bit more granularity. So we have examples of those, and I'm going to try to post a link into the chat. Hopefully the link works. I believe that it's an open board that you can see what's going on there, even if you're not a member of that board. But if you want to become a member, just send me a note and I will make sure that you can see it. So on there, on the far left column, we were using this Trello technology to try to organize how we were using this, because when we presented Samvera's particular way of doing this was in spreadsheets, not everybody really understood that. So on the top left of the top, or the left-hand column, there's a link to a Dublin core mapping that I did on my own to kind of start the discussion off. You can see that it's very limited, and we would lose a lot of the information, as you probably know, that we had in mods when we went that direction. So then as a group, in the second column, we created a mapping to DC terms, going from the mod's major top-level elements, and discussed how we could express those different things in DC terms. Now, DC terms also has a lot of limitations. One of the things that we came to was specifically title, and Dublin core doesn't give you the ability to, denote what the subtitle or title parts, like the part name, part number, or have like a non-filing section. So you can have a different display title versus a sort title. And a lot of us had like hierarchical geographical information. So we were like, well, let's look for other ontologies that could allow us, if we wanted to express this complexity that we often already have in mods. So based off of the title, we looked at BibFrame, because we knew that BibFrame was developed for librarians, and it's like as complex as Mark, so it can describe everything in your library catalog. And it's got a lot of ways to do all those fancy title things that we were looking at. But BibFrame is also an extremely complex ontology where you kind of lose the concept of this nice little object that we've made in Islandora. So when we think of an Islandora object, we've got like one record of metadata and one master file, kind of, and then you might have other metadata data streams, like technical metadata or derivative data streams or other things attached to it. If we go into a complex scheme, we might end up breaking that completely apart, which is, using the power of RDF, but also a migration struggle. So now we're at the point where we're trying to figure out what the general needs are. Everyone was kind of like, oh God, BibFrame. And since we do have a lot of librarians in the group, it kind of felt like we were going on a trip to Abilene, where everyone was like, yeah, I guess you want to do it, so let's all go along with it. And we just realized that there maybe wasn't as much enthusiasm for modeling everything in BibFrame as there was, as we thought. So what it looks like we're heading towards is some sort of kind of compromise that will also allow you, if you are at an institution that wants more specificity, you can build that in. If you don't want to bother with complex mappings, you'll be able to take those out. So we know that there's a lot of different levels of expertise with data munging, and with institutions who may or may not have full-time librarians or metadata professionals to devote to this. So we want to make sure that the institutions who aren't on the metadata interest group do have a say in how this works, because we don't want to leave you behind. We don't want to design something that's too complicated to use. So that brings me to my last point. Please feel free to reach out to the metadata interest group. We are on GitHub and we have bi-weekly meetings. So the next one will be, I think, the first Monday in March. My time is up. I'm a few minutes over. Thank you so much for the opportunity to chat with you, and I hope to hear from you soon.
Thank you very much, Rosie, and Mike for the update for the Islandora Meta Interest Group. If people need the link to the GitHub repository, you can always just reach out and make sure that you get it. So the next speaker is going to be Pham from here from the University of Toronto Scarborough Library. And she's going to be talking about the Dragoman's Renaissance Research Project. So sort of wrapping up or highlighting the previous discussions today and really showing what's possible. So please welcome Pham.
All right. Figure this out here. Can everyone hear me and see my slides before I start? All right, awesome. No. Okay, hi everyone, my name is Pham, and I'm speaking on behalf of the University of Toronto Scarborough Library's Digital Scholarship Unit about the Dragoman Renaissance Research Platform, a linked data project which is built on top of Islandora Claw. So the Digital Scholarship Unit consists of 2 developers, 1 technician, 1 systems administrator, and 2 librarians. We support the access, discovery, and preservation of the library's archival and special collections. We develop features to enhance our Islandora-based digital repository, which we try to contribute as much of our work as we can back to the community, and we work and consult on digital research projects for faculty. A lot of our work is available on GitHub if you go to github.com/digitalUTSC. So with Professor Natalie Rothman, who's here today from the Department of the Historical and Cultural Studies, thank you, as the primary investigator, one of our digital projects that we work on is the Dragoman Renaissance Research Platform. So this project focuses on the professional careers and textual practices of diplomatic translators called Dragomans, who were employed by the Venetian consulate in Istanbul from 1550 to 1750. So more broadly, the project seeks to shed light on the role of Dragomans, an important yet surprisingly understudied group in mediating relations between the Ottoman and Venetian empires at a crucial point in their long entangled history. The research curated on the Dragomans platform is over 15 years in the making. Most of the archival and secondary research was conducted using various bibliographic software management systems such as ProCite, EndNote, and Zotero. The resulting data was in 5 separate schemas with related and duplicate information in 3 languages. And so the partnership with the Digital Scholarship Unit began with the goal of consolidating this data to make meaningful connections and to interpret this data from different perspectives. So consolidating this data resulted in the modeling of 3 primary types of content. We have people, which refers to Dragomans and their related individuals. People have relationships to other people and documents by their role in the production of a document. We have archival objects, which are collated, bound, and archived fascicles. An archival object is comprised of multiple documents. And we have documents, which are summaries and partial transcriptions of official records. So during this modeling process, it became increasingly obvious over time that this data could be modeled in RDF. which lends itself the ability to study more closely the relationships between content and to discover new patterns in data that is otherwise difficult to achieve within the existing model. So why linked data? The decision to develop an ontology and use linked data for this particular set was made for various reasons. So the relationships between data points are significant and could be codified. There are complex relationships between dragomans and their role in the production or translation of documents that we wanted to examine closely. The ability to query and visualize these relationships will help us and the researcher eliminate the influence and the impact of these figures in history. Next, the desire to reuse and share data with various researchers was also important. The ontology will be the data model behind a collaborative platform that would facilitate collaboration across an international body of researchers. We wanted the ability to enrich data from various domains and draw from external ontologies that will assist in the development of existing vocabularies. And eventually, it will be important to develop a shared knowledge domain about dragomans amongst other researchers. So these are the main stages that we went through to develop the platform to interact with this data set. We are still iterating on each step as the data is continually being refined and new discoveries are being made. So using Noy and McGinnis's Ontology 101 framework, they're Stanford researchers, our team began the process of restructuring this data to develop an ontology suitable for Professor Rothman's Dragoman research. So developing the ontology was accomplished in 4 major steps. Or sorry, 5. Defining the scope, meaning defining the knowledge domain that the ontology will cover. Identifying classes, so that means defining the main concepts and, if applicable, sub-concepts. Identifying properties, look at what attributes the classes might possess. Defining the domain and range, so looking at any restrictions or assigning value types to properties. And finally, creating instances, so actually populating the data using the ontology specification. So our brainstorming and collaborative work was done in a shared document online. And then we began to construct the ontology with Protege, a graphical user interface editor developed at Stanford. Protege was particularly useful for defining the domain and range. So we used it to assign data types to the ranges of data properties, and we mapped classes to the domain and ranges of object properties. No new instances were created from this ontology. We already had the data, so we did a lot of processing work to prepare the data set so that it could conform to the ontology specification. This ontology is being shared in GitHub, where we versioned the improvements from both the researcher and the digital scholarship unit. We also found it useful to use WebVowel, which is an online tool that you can use to visualize your ontology. And that helped us to conceptualize and refine some of the terms that we use to semantically relate classes or data together. So we were originally planning to use Drupal 7 along with RDF-related modules that are contributed to develop the linked data platform for this project. But instead, we decided to use Islandora Claw for this, since it natively supports the access, creation, updating, and deletion of resources as linked data. And as Danny mentioned, it does so because Claw is using Fedora 4, and that's built on the linked data platform W3C architectural specification. So our unit is already involved in the Islandora community and has benefited from their knowledge and expertise, which has also made us inclined to use Claw. So over the years, we've adopted many of the practices of the community and applied them on a local scale to our own development. Consequently, we've been able to standardize software development in such a way that our work could be more easily deployed locally for all of our future projects, but also our work could be easily contributed back and used by other organizations. Other community practices have also improved the way that we internally manage our projects. Finally, Drupal has a number of features out of the box that we wanted to leverage. So Drupal lets you easily create content types, so modeling content through their UI and relate these content types to one another. Views allows for the creation of custom displays of content with really granular settings to show certain fields and lets you style them. And also there are so many Drupal modules available out there out of the box that we could use with our content that we wanted to kind of experiment with. So this is a screenshot of the site where users can browse and search the data. Some of our tasks to develop the platform involved developing the interface, modeling data, relating content types, setting up the search and views, and developing the migration tools and doing the migration. There's a lot in this implementation that we could talk about, but today we're going to focus on how linked data is integrated in CLAW. So the data was first migrated from a number of CSV spreadsheets, which contained hard-coded relationships between content. Consequently, the order in which the spreadsheets were migrated was important because the unique identifiers for these objects, or URIs, needed to exist before they could be related to other subsequently migrated content. All of the records, once they were migrated, have an underlying linked data format. For instance, in this screenshot here, if you look at a record through the interface, in this case, it's a person record for Zuen. The URL at the top is its unique identifier. Zuen, if you see on the right, is linked to other people, in this case, Andrea. And if you look at the underlying data view for the Zuen person record, it's in an open linked data format known as JSON LD, which contains the URI for the record at the top, and below contains other links, including related persons, such as the example at the bottom. Going to the URL from the example in the last slide takes you to the Andrea person record. And looking at the underlying JSON LD of Andrea's record, you can view that person's connections as well. So you can continue on and on like this, clicking through to these different URIs to traverse through the graph of relationships. The way this linked data was created in CLAW is as follows. So based on our ontology, the classes were made into Drupal content types. The content types have fields, which we assigned an equivalent RDF property. Drupal 8 already comes with RDF integration, so it was a relatively straightforward process for us to map fields to RDF properties by using configuration files in YAML format for each content type. These mappings are easily modified because of Drupal's import and export feature. Anytime we wanted to change a mapping or add a new RDF property to a field, we just needed to export the YAML file, modify it, and then import it back here. We are also currently versioning these mappings and making them available on GitHub. One tricky issue for us was to figure out how to implement or index complex ontology patterns, such as n-array relationships, as opposed to binary one-to-one relationships, to model some of our more contextual relationships. So the example the W3 specification gives to explain n-array relationships is that, for instance, when a person has a diagnosis, the diagnosis is comprised of two parts. It has one, the diagnosis value, which is the illness, and two, the diagnosis probability. The diagnosis probability only makes sense in relation to the diagnosis value. And people can have multiple diagnoses, each with their own diagnosis value and diagnosis probability value pair. We use this pattern in many places, one being the way we describe a dragoman's position. The dragoman, or the person source, has a person-position relation. The person-position relation contains the position property and links back to the person source in its own RDF record. It also has a start date, end date, and a notes property. So here's an example implementation in CLAW. We have the person record, Pietro, who is the person source. Pietro has a number of relationships to other people, which is called the person-position relation. The person-position relation here, Denny mentioned that we use a Drupal module called inline entity form, and that allows content types to be embedded in other content types and the ability to relate, edit, and update this embedded content. The person-position relation is a grouping of these discrete fields: position, position start date, position end date, notes, and person source. So this is what a person-position relation looks like when you go into the edit form for Pietro's record. When you edit a person-position relation, you can edit fields in that group. When you remove a person-position relation, the relation and entire grouping of fields will be removed. So the underlying data in Pietro's record consists only of person-position relations, but if you go into one of the URIs of a person-position relation, this is where you can access the rest of the fields. So the data of this project can be accessed via the Drupal website and Solr, which is the search engine, but we also have access to the entire data set through the Triple Store. And here's where you can write lots of interesting queries using Sparkle and leveraging the linked data format of the data set. So I'm just going to show you a demo here of how we do this. So the Triple Store provides a REST API, which can be used by other applications, such as this digital humanities tool here called Palladio. And surprise, this was also developed by Stanford. So what you can do here is load your endpoint, your REST API endpoint. So here we're loading our own endpoint from the Dragoman's site. And I'm just gonna, oh, I think there's already a query here, but I'm gonna use this one. So, and this is a Sparkle query that we made. You can run the query and it automatically populates the data up here, and then you can load it into their visualization tool here. This tool provides a number of visualization modes. We're gonna use graph here. And you can choose the different dimensions that you want to use. So the query specifically looked for people and their related people. So we're going to just click on person as a source, related person as a target here, and just make it prettier here. We can. Yeah. So you can see, well, maybe not really that well, but you can see it's using the URIs right now, but we also have the text that's indexed in the Triple Store, so you can use person name and related person to dereference the URIs here, so you can actually see the connections of people. You can also facet by relationships because we included in the query different roles. So looking at the different roles here. If you want to just look at parent-child networks, you can see the different family relations, marriage networks as well. I'm just going to zoom out so you can kind of see some people are connected, some people have their own little family. I'm just going to show you another query. Loading up. So we're uploading a new data set from our Sparkle query. Running that query again, loading it up here, and going back to graph. This time the query is looking at documents and who they're addressed to, and the topics. So you might want to answer questions like, on the topics that people are addressed to, what kind of topics or what's the nature of the documents that they are involved in being addressed to. Okay, so looking at editor name, topic, sizing and notes. So you can try and get a sense of who is involved in what here. So like this person is involved in lots of different topics. So Halab is involved in diplomatic relations, solving commercial disputes. The data still needs. Oh, okay. He's a judge. That makes sense. You can also facet by, let's say, if you want to just isolate specific topics, you can classify topics as well. So who's involved in safe conduct? This person, these people, and so on. Oh, they're related. A lot of them are related. Okay. Oh, they're all joking. And so actually, yeah, that's it for her presentation. We'd like to thank Natalie Rothman for giving us this opportunity to work on this project. And I think now we'll just have the time for discussion. Okay. Does anyone have any questions? You can feel free to type it at the bottom or just speak into the microphone if you want to unmute yourself. I'm going to mute myself though.
Hey, I'd just like to say that's great. It's awesome. I mean, you guys are so far along in a project using Claw. It's incredible. I was not expecting something that fully formed. Wow. I'm very impressed. Thank you for doing this and using the software and helping us out so much. Really cool.
Okay, so we have a question here from Clifford from Queens. Because Claw ships with an API, are people using different tools besides Drupal themes to build the front end?
Is that for me to answer? I'm sorry.
Probably.
Probably. Let me stop my cat from pawing. He wants it. Joys of working from home. You can, right? You can do a headless Drupal. That's what it's called. We are certainly very cognizant of that use case and want to make sure that that's possible, but I have no example of someone using Claw like that yet.
The next question from Diego is, how many RDF resources did we ingest? I think. Street records, we had about 2,800. Oh, triples in total? But so about 28 resources, so 2,100 documents, 600 people. How many archival objects generated about 80,000 triples? The question from Mark Jordan. Kim, what would it take to use Palladio to explore the contents of a Claw repo? So I think there are different options for Palladio. You can use the Sparkle endpoint. You can also, if you wanted to export data in other formats, you could do that. I think it takes CSV. So it was relatively, all we had to do was set up the REST API. We had to enable cross-origin resource sharing and make sure everything was indexed that we wanted to look at and put it in just load in the Sparkle endpoint, and basically that was it. We were able to use the data that was loaded and kind of just use the Palladio. It's web-based, so you just go to hdlab.stanford.edu /Palladio app, and that's it.
Right, so all you need to do is just basically expose your endpoint, and you could go in at that high level, and then do a query in a Sparkle query, and now you're exploring your Claw repo.
Yeah, it's as simple as that.
Yes, thanks.
Bethany Seeger says, is a Sparkle endpoint via Blaze Graph, or does Claw expose it somehow? So yeah, we used Blaze Graph. Yes. Okay, so this is the, oh, I have to share my screen. So you guys are watching. This is basically what the Dragoman's platform looks like. You go to research materials, the various different documents that we've ingested, along with so 3 main content types. If you want to take a look at one of these. All of these fields are indexed in Solr, but they're also at the same time being indexed in the Drupal store, and that's how we can access it. So anyone who wants to go in can edit these fields as well. And we also, it was relatively straightforward to set up the facets on the side, and they're quite configurable as well.
Jay has a question.
One on the Drupal Solr side. So if I understand this correctly, all of the Solr functionality stuff. So if we absolutely need Solr, system not using it for something else, pull that all in with another search engine directly interact and integrate directly with your LeFaive and
Yeah. So let me tell them the question. So the question that was asked from MJ is that all of the in Drupal they use Solr out of the box, but if you don't want to use Solr, if you could swap it out for something else.
so even with Solr, but I'm sure there's probably that so there's nothing that's very custom here. We did learn some tricks from last week from Rosie's tape. So how to do certain our parents stuff as well. But there's nothing that we can get as customized.
Can you repeat that again? I'm sorry. Okay, thank you.
So that answered MJ, and to summarize what Nat said was essentially that Solr is just provided out of the box, but it's not so customized that you could say it's built on top of the Drupal search API, so you could actually swap in other search engines like Elasticsearch or other tools if you had a local preference and do it that way. And maybe Danny, you could also just confirm that that sounds correct, that part of the reason, one of the things considered in Claw was that you could actually say use Solr search, but if you didn't want to, you could use Elasticsearch. If you didn't want to use Elasticsearch, you could use something else more easily than you could say in the 7x branch of Islandora. And this is also one of these considerations with the scalability. So Danny, maybe can you just confirm that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. You hit the nail right on the head. We don't do anything in the core code that touches anything that pierces the veil of that API. So anything that's compatible with the search API will work. And I just did a quick look. There is an Elasticsearch connector out there, although I've never used it.
Okay.
Yeah, like I see that you guys are only using a node entity. Is there a way to use some custom entity instead of nodes and report mine, or it's like Flow, or Flow is just specifically meant to work with the node entity?
So the question was, is Claw designed to just use node entities, or if you can use possibly customized entities?
It's node entities right now. It is there is essentially like a one-to-one correlation between the types of resources you can put in a Fedora and the types of resources that Drupal makes, and we just kind of line them up. So like nodes become RDF sources, files become non-RDF sources, And the media that I was speaking about, which is like Drupal's kind of funny way of putting fields on files, that becomes the RDF source that is like linked to a non-RDF source that describes it. And we just map those things like that. So you can't make a custom one. We actually started out doing that and ditched it to go with nodes because we got so much more out of Drupal by doing nodes exclusively. But to kind of mitigate all of that, that's sort of why we're doing the stuff we can do with context. So you can't necessarily go like hack it up and add all these things to nodes, but you can make all these different nodes and put all the different fields on them and configure it however you want, and then maybe like tag it with a taxonomy term, and then you can use context to be like, oh, we'll treat this a little bit differently or something like that.
So next question is from Diego. Wondering about the multilingual support, looking at one of these facets here. One of these, yeah, looking at the search. And the transcription part? Let's see. Oh, okay. Yeah, looking at that transcription, did you have any issues in coding? How was the process? And any general experience that's relevant. So, I mean, a lot of the, yeah, a lot of this data was before originally in these citation management systems. And I mean, we tried to do as much to kind of consolidate the data and resolve some of those encoding issues. I mean, there's still some that remains, but we moved them into the spreadsheets. Tried to keep the encoding standards the same. And I know there's also like multilingual modules, support modules in Drupal that we could kind of leverage, but we haven't really explored much of that stuff yet.
Drupal does have a very good support for multiple sites, so you could translate each form entity by itself.
Hey Diego, although we didn't use multilingual fields or support for this site, we've explored a little bit. So Drupal 8 support for multilingual capability is very, very good. You could translate a particular form. Each field could be translatable, or it could be, you could have a unilingual, like a particular field could be multilingual, and particular fields can be just unilingual. So the support is very good overall from Drupal 8 to 8. I don't think there's anything specific in Claude that will limit us. It's pretty much what Drupal offers, and Drupal 8's multilingual capability is pretty good.
So I guess I'll just ask last call for questions here either at the TSC or online. You just pop it in. Otherwise, we can wrap it up. So I'll just wait a few moments and thank you. I'll just take this opportunity to thank everyone for taking the time out to come and attend and learn a bit more. And I hope you found it stimulating and learned a few things. And hopefully you can go forward and do some neat stuff too.
All right, thanks everyone.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, and people here, you're welcome to have more food. Hang out a little bit longer if you want.